Dobro. History. Archive.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up the case file on what is, without a doubt, the most famous disappearance in aviation history.
Flight 19.
Flight 19. And look, we are not here to talk about magnetic vortices or, little green men. This is a forensic audit.
That's the only way to do it.
We're going straight to the primary sources, the Navy boards of inquiry, the original radio logs, the technical specs, to understand what really happened on December 5, 1945.
And you have to understand, the scale of this is just immense. It wasn't just one plane. It was 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers.
5.
And then hours later, a PBM Mariner rescue plane sent to find them. 27 men, all highly trained, vanished in just a few hours. This single event is the patient zero for the entire Bermuda Triangle myth.
And that's our mission for you today. We're going to peel back 70-plus years of sensationalism because the real story is, I think, much more complex and, frankly, a lot more terrifying than any of the fiction.
It is.
This was a cascade failure. It's a story of human factors, 1940s technology, and a really rigid command structure all colliding at the worst possible moment.
It's a sequence of preventable errors. And when you reconstruct the timeline, when you look at the equipment and the psychology of the people involved, you see how a navigational mistake, a recoverable one, spiraled into this global conspiracy theory.
Okay, so let's set the stage. December 1945. The Second World War has been over for just 3 months. What does the U.S. Navy look like at this point?
It's chaos. I mean, that's the only word for it. It's organized chaos.
Right, not high alert. It's fatigue.
It's institutional fatigue, exactly.
Yeah.
You have this incredibly rapid demobilization happening. The Navy is shedding its most experienced people, veteran pilots, mechanics, radio operators, at a staggering rate.
They're all going home.
They're all going home. So the system that supported this massive war effort is being dismantled piece by piece. But the training pipeline, it's still running.
So the people left behind are running on fumes, maybe, or they're new guys in accelerated programs. The urgency of combat is gone, but that wartime discipline, that sort of follow orders no matter what mentality.
Well, that's still there.
Yeah.
That is baked into the culture. And you see this happening at Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, which was essentially a finishing school for Avenger pilots.
A finishing school, I like that.
Yeah, these weren't raw recruits. These were skilled pilots learning a new, very specific, very heavy aircraft. But the whole system supporting them was starting to fray around the edges.
And one of the most critical details in the sources is just how much the infrastructure had been scaled back.
This is a huge piece of the puzzle that gets missed in all the talk about mysteries.
Yeah.
The safety nets that were in place during the war, they were being taken down.
Like what, specifically?
Well, search and rescue coordination was becoming decentralized, and the HFDF networks, the high-frequency direction-finding systems that could get a fix on a lost plane, they were being deactivated or were just running on skeleton crews.
So the tools that could have saved them were literally being switched off.
Switched off. In fact, the reports note that key radar stations at Boca Raton and Hollywood, which would have been critical, were either shut down or operating at reduced capacity.
Yeah.
If those had been fully operational, they might have tracked Flight 19 the whole way.
It's a fatal lack of redundancy then. They're running these complex missions with a safety net that's full of holes.
Exactly. Which brings us to the mission itself. Navigation problem number 1.
Right, and this wasn't some sightseeing tour. It was designed specifically to rely on one thing: dead reckoning.
Dead reckoning. You know, it's an ancient nautical skill. You start from a known point, and you calculate your position based only on your heading, your speed, and the time you've been flying. There's no GPS, no radio beacons to guide you home.
So if your math is off, even by a little bit, if you misjudge the wind,
You're lost. It demands perfection. And the flight plan was designed to test that perfection. It was a 316-mile triangular route out over the Bahamas.
So let's walk through the legs of this flight. Leg 1 seems straightforward enough.
It was. They fly east 091 degrees for 56 miles out to a place called the Hen and Chicken Shoals. They do a practice bombing run there. That gives them a solid visual fix. They know exactly where they are.
Okay, confirmed position. But leg 2 is where it gets tricky. They continue east, same heading, for another 67 miles. And that takes them right across.
The Gulf Stream.
And the Gulf Stream isn't just a line on a map.
Not at all. It's a powerful ocean current moving north at, sometimes 2, 3, even 4 knots. If you're in a big, heavy plane like the Avenger and you don't calculate the correct crab angle to fight that push,
A crab angle.
it's the direction you have to fly into the wind or current to maintain your true course. If you fail to do that over the course of that leg, the Gulf Stream could easily push you 5, maybe even 10 miles north of where you think you are.
And 5 miles doesn't sound like much, but when you're looking for one small island in an ocean of small islands...
It's everything.
Yeah.
It completely throws off your mental map. And that's critical for leg 3, which was a big turn to the north-northwest, 346 degrees for 73 miles. The plan was to make a visual turn right over Grand Bahama.
But if it didn't push north...
They might miss it entirely, or see a different set of islands and think it's Grand Bahama. And that's when the confusion starts.
And then the final leg, the home stretch. Southwest, 241 degrees for 120 miles back to Fort Lauderdale.
Right. And on paper, they had more than enough fuel. The Avengers could stay in the air for 5.5, maybe 6 hours. This whole flight should have taken 3.
So fuel wasn't the initial problem.
Fuel is not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem was that navigational indecision flying north, then east, then west, burned up all of that safety margin. They turned a 6-hour capacity into a ticking clock.
Let's talk about the machine itself, the TBM Avenger. You called it a beast, and the sources really paint a picture of this thing.
It was a beast of burden. Built by General Motors, designed by Grumman, it was the heaviest single-engine aircraft of the Second World War.
It's heavier than a fighter.
Oh, much. We're talking a maxed weight of nearly 18,000 pounds.
Yeah.
This thing was designed to take off from a carrier, carry a 2,000-pound torpedo, and withstand incredible punishment. It was not a delicate instrument for navigation.
And you have to put yourself inside that cockpit. To understand the disorientation, you have to understand the sensory environment. It sounds like it was just an assault.
A total assault. The engine was a 1,900 horsepower Wright Cyclone radial engine. Pilot said it wasn't a noise, it was a physical vibration you felt deep in your chest. Just a constant deafening roar.
And the smells.
Pervasive. You got aviation fuel, you have hot oil, and then there's the distinct smell of 52606 hydraulic fluid. It was everywhere. It's soaked into your flight suit. It's this constant low-level stressor that grinds you down.
So your cognitive load is already maxed out before anything even goes wrong.
Absolutely. And this is compounded by the fact that even though it's a 3-man crew, the pilot is effectively alone.
How so? You have a pilot, a turret gunner, and a radio man.
Right, but look at the layout. The pilot is up front. Behind him is the main fuel tank and a bunch of radio gear. And then way in the back, in the belly of the plane, is the radio man, who actually has the best chart table and navigation tools.
So they can't just lean over and point at a map.
No. Their only connection is an electrical intercom system, the ICS. If that system fails or if the engine noise is just too loud, that pilot is completely isolated. He's flying blind, making decisions all on his own.
That's a staggering design flaw for a long-range navigational aircraft.
It is. And it all leads to the specific mechanical failure that we think started this whole disaster. The compasses.
The compasses. The Avenger had 2 of them. The main one was the flux gate.
The remote indicating compass, yeah,
Right.
flex gate. That was the high-tech one. It was gyro-stabilized. It ran on the plane's electrical system. And it was incredibly accurate. It's a primary tool for a mission like this.
But it relied on electricity.
And if that electrical system had even a momentary glitch, the gyro could tumble and the compass would start giving you garbage readings or just fail completely.
And if the flux gate fails, you're forced to use the backup.
The standby magnetic compass, the whiskey compass.
Which is basically just a glorified Boy Scout compass, right?
Essentially, yes. It's a magnetized needle floating in fluid. And it was notoriously unreliable in an aircraft as heavy and prone to turbulence as the Avenger. It was subject to all sorts of errors.
What kind of errors? When you say dip and variation, what does that actually mean for a pilot trying to fly straight?
Okay, so variation is simple. That's just a geographic difference between true north and magnetic north. You account for that in your flight plan. But dip is the killer. The Earth's magnetic field isn't flat. The lines of force actually dip down toward the poles. So when a heavy plane turns or accelerates, the momentum causes that compass card to tilt and dip, and it can give you a reading that's wildly inaccurate. It might even swing in the opposite direction of your turn.
So you turn right, and the compass tells you you're turning left.
Exactly. And in rough air, you get precession. The compass just oscillates. It swings back and forth and never settles on a true heading. In the weather Flight 19 flew into later, that whiskey compass would have been basically useless.
So the most likely scenario is the electrical flux gate failed, forcing the flight leader, Lieutenant Taylor, to rely on an instrument that was actively lying to him.
It wasn't supernatural.
Yeah.
It wasn't a vortex. It was a predictable mechanical failure that set the stage for a catastrophic failure of human judgment.
And that brings us to the human element, because the hardware failure was just the spark. The command structure, the people involved, that was the fuel.
You really have to see this as a socio-technical disaster. It's about how people and technology interact under pressure. And at the center of it is the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor.
On paper, this guy looks perfect for the job. 28 years old, 2,500 flight hours, a combat veteran from the Pacific.
He was experienced, no question. But when you dig into the records, you find these critical vulnerabilities that made him uniquely the wrong person to be leading that flight on that day.
Let's start with the simple one. He was new to the area.
He was. He'd recently transferred from Naval Air Station Miami. So his whole mental map of the local geography was built around flying out of Miami, which puts you right over the Florida Keys.
And the Keys run kind of southwest to northeast.
Correct. But from Fort Lauderdale, your primary reference points are the Bahama Islands, which run more north-south, parallel to the coast. It's a subtle difference, but when you're stressed and your instruments are out, you revert to your most ingrained mental model.
And his ingrained habits were not great. The sources point to a documented history of him getting lost.
This is the absolute core of the issue. This wasn't a one-off. During the war, Taylor had gotten so completely lost on a flight that he ran out of fuel and had to ditch his plane in the ocean. He was lucky a destroyer picked him up.
So he had a known pattern of behavior. Under stress, he distrusts his instruments and trusts his gut.
Exactly. He was known as a seat-of-the-pants flyer. And his gut had already been proven to be dangerously wrong once before.
And to top it all off, he didn't even want to fly that day. He had requested to be taken off the schedule.
He had. We don't know why. Maybe he was sick, maybe just fatigued.
Yeah.
He was flying under some kind of duress. You put all that together, an unreliable gut, a history of getting lost, unfamiliarity with the area, and flying under duress. It's a recipe for disaster.
Now, what about the other 4 pilots? The students. These weren't kids fresh out of flight school.
Not at all, and this is what makes the tragedy so profound. These were experienced Marine Corps captains and Navy lieutenants, guys like Edward Powers and Joseph Bossy. They were seasoned officers, many with more combat time than Taylor, just learning a new plane.
This creates what the sources call the rank paradox, or the command gradient.
It's a deadly dynamic. You have an instructor, Taylor, who is the designated flight leader. But the men following him are, in many ways, his peers, or even his superiors in experience. They almost certainly knew he was making a mistake. Their own instruments were likely working just fine.
But the military culture of 1945.
It demanded absolute, unquestioning obedience to the flight leader. To break formation and fly your own course would have been an act of insubordination, a career-ending move at best.
So they were trapped. They could follow their leader to their deaths or disobey an order and face the consequences.
And in that moment, they chose discipline. That rigid command structure silenced the very people who held the key to their survival.
Okay, let's get into the timeline. The flight takes off at 2:10 p.m. The first hour or so, everything is completely by the book.
Totally routine. Good weather, so some big cumulus clouds around. They get to the Hen and Chicken Shoals, they drop their practice bombs, and they head east on leg 2. This is where the Gulf Stream probably gives them that first little unnoticed push to the north.
The crisis really begins around 3:45 p.m. They should have finished leg 2 and be making that turn north towards Grand Bahama.
And this seems to be where it all goes wrong. We think because they were already north of their intended track, and maybe Taylor's flex gate compass failed right around this time, they missed their visual cue of Grand Bahama. All they see are small, scattered islands.
And we know this because the first sign of trouble isn't from Taylor. It's from one of the students, intercepted by another pilot in the area.
Right. Lieutenant Robert Cox is flying nearby, and he overhears one of the students say, very clearly, "I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn."
After that last turn. So the error happened at that critical juncture.
It did. And then a few minutes later, Taylor comes on the radio, and you can hear his confirmation bias taking over completely.
Let's get his exact words out there. He says, "Both my compasses are out, and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I am over land, but it's broken. I am sure I'm in the Keys."
I am sure I'm in the Keys. That's the fatal assumption. Because from the air, the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas look almost identical to the Florida Keys, a chain of low, broken islands in shallow, turquoise water.
So his brain sees something that fits his old mental map from flying out of Miami, and he latches onto it.
He latches onto it. And if you're in the Keys, the mainland of Florida is to the north. but they were in the Bahamas, where the mainland was to the west.
So he makes the fatal decision. He orders the entire flight to head north and later northeast.
He leads them parallel to the coast of Florida, deeper and deeper into the open Atlantic.
The next hour, from 4 to 5 o'clock, the radio logs basically document what you could call a battle for control of the flight.
It is agonizing to read the transcripts. You can hear the dissent bubbling up from the students. They know he's wrong. At one point, you hear a voice, probably one of the Marine captains, just burst out in frustration. Damn it, if we would just fly west, we would get home.
They're stating the fundamental rule of survival for any pilot lost off the east coast of Florida. Fly west, toward the setting sun.
It's the one thing you do. But Taylor rejects it. And it's not because he's being irrational in his own mind. His flawed logic is that if he's in the Keys, flying west will take him deeper into the Gulf of Mexico. He's afraid of making a different but equally fatal mistake.
And while they're arguing, zigzagging north, then east, then briefly west.
They're just burning fuel. They're turning their 6-hour range into nothing.
As we get past 5 o'clock, two things happen. The sun starts to set, and the weather gets significantly worse.
A cold front moves in. The winds pick up to 25-30 knots, rain squalls hit them, visibility drops, the sea state gets very rough. On the ground, though, the Navy finally starts to get a handle on where they are.
Right, using the High-Frequency Direction Finding Network, the HFDF.
Yes, they use stations in Florida and the Caribbean to triangulate the flight's radio transmissions. And by about 5:50 p.m., they get a pretty solid fix.
And where were they?
They were near 29 degrees north, 79 west. Put that on the map for you. That's way north of the Bahamas, and a good distance offshore from about New Smyrna Beach, Florida.
So the Navy knows where they are. They have the answer. Fly west, 270 degrees.
They know the answer, but they can't get the message through. This is the communication breakdown.
What happened?
Their training frequency was just a mess. You had massive static from the storm. And believe it or not, it was being overpowered by high-power commercial radio stations broadcasting out of Cuba.
So the life-saving message is being drowned out by, what, music and commercials?
Basically. And they tell Taylor to switch to the universal search and rescue frequency, 3,000 kilohertz, but he refuses.
Why on earth would he refuse?
Because by this point, in the dark and the storm, his formation is starting to fall apart. He's afraid that if they switch frequencies, he'll lose voice contact with his own planes. He prioritizes keeping his flight together over getting the fix from the ground. It was another fatal, but in his mind, logical decision.
And that takes us into the final horrific hour.
After 6 o'clock, you can hear the logic just completely fracture. At 6:04 p.m., Taylor comes on with this baffling transmission. He says, "We didn't fly far enough east. We may as well just turn around and fly east again."
He's flying away from land.
He's flying into the abyss. He's just guessing now. And then at about 6:20, he gives the final grim order.
All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together.
That's naval aviation doctrine. You don't ditch alone in the dark in a storm. You go down together to create a bigger target for rescuers and, theoretically, to help each other. But in 30-foot seas, in total darkness, the chances of survival were
zero.
Effectively zero. The last anyone heard from them was a faint, garbled transmission around 7:04 p.m., and then just static.
Now, for the people who believe in the supernatural version of this story, the loss of the rescue plane is the smoking gun. It's the thing that makes it seem impossible.
Right? How can lightning strike twice? It can't just be a coincidence. But the thing is, the loss of the rescue plane was not a mystery. It wasn't even a surprise to people who flew that aircraft.
This was the PBM Mariner, call sign Training 49. It took off at 7:27 p.m. with a crew of 13, and it had a nickname.
It did. They called it the Flying Gas Tank.
That doesn't sound good.
It wasn't. The Mariner was a huge flying boat, and it had a known catastrophic design flaw. The fuel lines were flexible, and they had a tendency to loosen up, especially in heavy turbulence like they were flying into that night.
So fuel would leak out.
High-octane aviation fuel would leak and pool in the bilge, the bottom of the hull, which wasn't pressurized. The whole lower section of the aircraft would fill with explosive vapor. It was a time bomb waiting for a single spark.
And that spark could come from anywhere, a faulty wire, a radio.
Anything. And at 7:50 p.m., just 23 minutes after takeoff, the bomb went off.
And this is the critical point. This is not a silent, mysterious disappearance. It was witnessed.
It was. The tanker ship SS Gaines Mills was sailing right off the coast of New Smyrna Beach. Her captain, Shona Stanley, gave a very clear report.
What did he say he saw?
He said he observed a burst of flames, apparently an explosion, leaping flames 100 feet high and burning for 10 minutes. A massive fireball that lit up the night sky.
And there was technological proof, too.
There was. The aircraft carrier USS Solomons was tracking the Mariner on its radar. And at 7:50 p.m., the radar blip just vanished. At the exact time and in the exact location of the explosion reported by the Gaines Mills.
So the two events are completely unrelated. Flight 19 gets lost due to a navigational catastrophe. Training 49 explodes due to a known mechanical flaw while searching for them.
It's a tragic coincidence, but the public and later the myth makers fuse these two separate explainable tragedies into one single unexplainable event. And that's where the legend gets its power.
So after all this, the Navy launches a massive search, 250,000 square miles. They find some floating debris from the Mariners, but from Flight 19.
Nothing. Not a single piece of wreckage. Not a life raft. Not a body. The sea state was so violent, it likely tore the planes to shreds on impact, and the Gulf Stream carried the small fragments away.
The Navy convenes a 500-page board of inquiry, and their initial conclusion, based on the radio logs, is pretty clear-cut.
It is. They placed the blame 100% on Lieutenant Taylor. The official finding was pilot error, compounded by what they called mental aberration.
Harsh words.
Very. But based on the evidence they had, him ignoring his students, flying east instead of west, it was a logical conclusion.
But this is where the story takes a turn, not because of new evidence, but because of Taylor's mother.
Catherine Taylor. She refused to accept that her son, a combat veteran, was to blame. And she began a campaign, writing letters to the Navy, arguing a very specific and very valid point.
Which was?
Her argument was simple. With that wreckage, you cannot prove that the initial failure wasn't mechanical. You can't prove his compasses hadn't failed through no fault of his own. To blame him without physical evidence, she argued, was an injustice.
So the Navy is in a tough spot. They have a grieving mother, they have a conclusion based on strong circumstantial evidence, but they have no smoking gun, no plane.
So they do what bureaucracies do. In 1947, to spare the family further pain and acknowledging the lack of physical proof, the Navy amended the official report.
And they changed the cause from pilot error
to cause unknown.
And those two words are the seed from which the entire legend grows.
It's the vacuum. Cause unknown invites speculation. If the mighty U.S. Navy doesn't know what happened, it must be something truly bizarre.
Their writers were more than happy to fill that vacuum. In 1964, you get an article in a pulp magazine by Vincent Gaddis called The Deadly Bermuda Triangle.
He coins the phrase, and he uses Flight 19 as his centerpiece, but he conveniently leaves out all the radio transcripts showing Taylor's confusion and the students' dissent.
Then in 1974, Charles Berlitz publishes The Bermuda Triangle. It becomes a massive bestseller.
And Berlitz just invents things whole cloth. He adds details like a green fog and strange electronic effects that are nowhere in the official record.
And then finally, Hollywood cements it in place. 1977, Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
The opening scene. Flight 19, discovered perfectly preserved in the Gobi Desert. The pilots climb out, not having aged a day. The alien abduction theory becomes the definitive pop culture explanation.
We have to specifically address some of the famous quotes attributed to the flight because they're still cited as proof of something strange. Lines like, "Everything looks wrong," or "Don't come after me."
Total fiction. 100% fabricated, decades after the fact. They do not appear in any of the primary source Navy logs. The real radio calls are much more mundane and far more tragic.
What about the reference to white water? That's often used to imply glowing supernatural seas.
That transmission is real. But if you're a pilot in a storm, contemplating ditching your plane in the ocean, white water has a very specific, terrifying meaning. It means the seas are breaking. It means huge white caps. It was a simple, desperate observation about the violence of the sea state they were about to crash into.
Okay, so we've established the cause was a cascade of human and mechanical failures. But let's quickly tick off the other natural explanations for the triangle and show why they just don't fit the facts of Flight 19.
Let's do it. First up, the big one, methane hydrates.
This is the idea that the seafloor can burp up huge bubbles of methane gas, sinking ships and downing planes.
It's a fascinating theory, but it has zero relevance here. First, there's no geological evidence of a massive methane release in that area at that time. Second, and more importantly, Flight 19 flew around for hours while lost. They weren't instantly knocked out of the sky by a gas cloud.
Right, it doesn't fit the timeline. What about magnetic anomalies? The agonic line, where true north and magnetic north line up.
Another popular one. And it's true, the agonic line passed through that area in 1945, What that actually means is that there was zero magnetic variation. It would have made navigation simpler, if anything. It certainly wouldn't cause two different types of compasses to fail in completely contradictory ways.
So Taylor's problem wasn't some external magnetic force. It was an internal mechanical failure of his specific instruments.
Exactly. His problem was in his cockpit, not in the Earth's core.
Which leaves the final question. If it was just a normal crash, why has no wreckage of Flight 19 ever been found?
And the answer there is the weather. It comes back to those 30-foot seas, an 18,000-pound aircraft hitting a wall of water like that at over 100 miles an hour.
It would disintegrate.
It would be shredded. And the debris would be small, light fragments, and the powerful Gulf Stream current would have immediately grabbed that debris field and dispersed it over hundreds of square miles of ocean within hours. The sea itself erased the evidence.
So to summarize the final analysis, a compass fails. A flight leader with a history of getting lost trusts his flawed gut instead of his experienced crew. A rigid military hierarchy prevents that crew from saving themselves. And a violent storm destroys the evidence.
That's it. It's the perfect storm of human error, mechanical vulnerability, and bad luck.
So where do we think Flight 19 is today?
Based on that last reliable HFDF fix and their subsequent flight path east, the wreckage is almost certainly lying in the deep Atlantic, east of the continental shelf, in water that could be 2 or 3 miles deep. We know that ocean floor is a graveyard for aircraft from that era. They found 5 other Avengers nearby in 1991. Flight 19 is likely down there with them, just waiting.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Let's just pull out the key takeaways for you. First, the flight leader, Lieutenant Taylor, wasn't just any pilot. He had a pre-existing, documented history of this exact kind of navigational failure.
Second, the loss of the rescue plane wasn't part of the mystery. It was a tragic but explainable accident caused by a known design flaw in the flying gas tank.
And maybe most importantly, the student pilots knew the way home. They knew to fly west, but military discipline forced them to follow their leader into the storm.
And finally, the entire legend, the whole Bermuda Triangle myth, really hinges on a single bureaucratic decision. The Navy changing the verdict from pilot error to cause unknown. Not because of new evidence, but to comfort a grieving family. That small act of compassion created the void the mythmakers needed.
A fascinating and ultimately very human story.
It is. And here's the final thought I'd leave you with. The scientific reality of Flight 19 is, in its own way, terrifying. It shows that competent, well-trained people in powerful machines can still make a series of small, compounding errors that lead to complete oblivion. But the legend, the story of aliens or vortices, that endures. And I think it endures because it's actually more comforting than the truth.
How so?
Because the myth removes human fallibility from the equation. It's easier for us to imagine a mysterious external force than it is to accept the terrifying primal fear that sometimes we just get it wrong and we can simply vanish without a trace because of our own mistakes.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We encourage you to keep digging, keep questioning the simple stories.
Always question the cause unknown.